is Connor. This is my pro-con speech for Flex CTA 103. I'll be going over the pros and cons of photo ID requirements for voting. I've spent the last 4 weeks or so researching this, and I found a few great examples for resources that I'm going to be sharing with you today. I'll be breaking this down into 2 parts: the direct effect on voter turnout, and then the immediate social ramifications of such. First, looking at the pros of voter turnouts. Chris Corbat, the former Kansas Secretary of State and current Attorney General, says it would dramatically reduce voter fraud. Out of the reported cases, just over 2,000 nationwide, it is his belief that due to the fact that most polling workers are volunteers, they are not properly trained in spotting all types of voter fraud, and thus the number is actually much higher than it actually is. When he addressed the state legislation in Kansas in 2011, he asked the Attorney General's office, out of the 221 cases of reported voter fraud, why was there no immediate large-scale convictions? And the Attorney General's office responded that due to a lack of budgetary, manpower, and time, they were only able to investigate 30 of these cases, and out of those, only 7 were convicted. So Chris's stance is that voter fraud is greatly underreported, and when it is reported, we don't have the resources necessary to stop repeat offenders. The counter-argument to this is going to come from the ACLU. The ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union that has been founded in 1920 and for over the last 100 years have been fighting as a nonprofit to maintain American civil liberties. In their fact sheet, opposed voter ID laws by Robert Huffman, they state that out of the US Census, 7% of Americans, just over 20 million, do not have a government-issued photo ID card. When this is compared to the PBS article written by Christine Cassidy and Ivan Monroe, members of the Associated Press, in their article titled "In Wisconsin, Photo ID Laws Prove Insurmountable to Voters," they interviewed Kathleen Tyndale, an out-of-state student attending MIAD, Milwaukee Art Institute of Design, where when she went to vote in Milwaukee, she provided her Ohio State's driver's license, her student ID, her utility bill from We Energies, and her lease agreement proving that she lives in Milwaukee. She was unable to vote in Wisconsin because she did not have a Wisconsin driver's license. So even though she had a government-issued photo ID and was able to prove she was a resident, she was not able to vote due to the difference in this state's ruling, showing that this 7% is going to be a lower representation of those who would actually be affected by this, as the difference between state and state regulations will differ. Moving on to the side effects of this, I'll be talking about the US News article written by Hans Spakowski entitled "Voter ID Laws Protect the Integrity of Our Democracy." Mr. Spakowski was a former member of the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, whose organization is entirely responsible for maintaining the integrity of federal elections, making him a great resource to determine integrity when it comes to elections anyway. In his argument, he states that the need for photo IDs to get married, to buy a house, to rent an apartment, to fly, or to drive is already such a benefit to obtain a photo ID that adding this to that list would be inconsequential, stating that 7% of Americans who already have an issue with obtaining a government ID and not participating in any of these are most likely not voting anyway. But the social perspective of boosting integrity of elections, ensuring that those who vote have been participating in a fair and honest election, is going to outweigh this cost. To counter this, again looking at that ACLU fact sheet, they state that it's not economically viable. They're not arguing that it won't boost integrity, but the economic cost on the state and the average American is too great. When looking at Indiana, from 2007 to 2010, they spent $10 million manufacturing and issuing photo ID cards. This, however, did not cover the travel cost or the documentation cost Indiana residents needed in order to even apply for these free ID cards. It was estimated that they spent on average anywhere between $75 and $175 to obtain social security cards and birth certificates to apply for a photo ID. When looking at this graph from Ohio, when they were debating on instituting a photo ID requirement, they noted that it would cost the state for the first 4 years about $15 million in order just to issue ID cards, and if they were to absorb the documentation cost, it would be over $16 million. When we amplify this to larger states like New York or California, we now have to ask, is it economically viable for them? In summary, voter turnout would be impacted by greatly reducing voter fraud, whether or not it is underreported, but it would also impact tens of millions of Americans due to an immediate cutoff of that 7% who do not have any form of photo ID, and potentially more who do not meet specific state requirements. That being said though, it would boost public opinion on election turnouts, creating a general sense of agreement on voter turnout, but it also could be too costly for the states. This has been my pro and con speech for photo ID requirements for voting. Thank you.